Who was the first to learn great secrets sealed away in the bowels of the earth? Who was it who learned that through fire, force, and forethought, certain stones could be transformed into brutal weapons, useful tools, and the most beautiful art? Who, mastering the fire, was the first to melt copper and produce the first metal blade? What arcane master unlocked the riddle of steel? To the ancients, the process of the smith was hidden in a veil of mystery, often even to the smith himself. Those who possessed the knowledge of these arts were held in awe, seen to wield magic no less dangerous than that of the witch or sorcerer, producing weapons imbued with spirits of their own. His craft gave him power over nearly all the activities of the tribe. Nowhere is this more true than in the Celtic world, whose smiths early on mastered the techniques of bronze and iron, who played a critical role in the Bronze Age tin trade across Europe, and who developed a high degree of artistic mastery first in gold, then bronze, and later iron. They dug deep into the earth to extract the ore, and many of their designs and innovations were copied by Romans, including both major types of Roman swords and possibly chainmail. Their weapons were held in high esteem in Greece, where they were imported and stored in treasuries, even as their warriors were employed as mercenaries from at least 400 BC. It is thus not surprising that the god of the smith would prove to be one of the most important deities in the ancient Celtic society. We will journey back in time into the depths of the ancient Celtic mines, into the medieval tales of the Gaels, the enchantments, curses, and saints, and captivating and often mysterious works they produced to discover who is Gobannus. Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Please give a like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon or PayPal, where you will be joining a great community of enthusiasts. Much thanks to all of my supporters. Britain was likely first known to the ancient Mediterranean world simply as the Tin Island, occasionally mentioned by ancient Greeks who had a very vague understanding of its geographical location and the role that it played in the ancient European economy. With the arrival of the Bell Beaker folk in Britain ushering in the Copper Age, mining and smithing operations began. By about 2000 BC, the Great Orme Mine was already in full operation. During the peak of production, between 1700 and 1400 BC, it's estimated to have produced approximately 1760 tons of copper. This copper, initially used alone, was later combined with tin, produced in a mine in Cornwall. Analysis of the isotopes of the Nebra sky disk, dating approximately to 1600 BC recovered in Germany, shows that the tin and gold were both sourced from Britain, the tin specifically from the mine in Cornwall. And it's likely that the British mine produced much of the tin available in Central and Northern Europe during the Bronze Age. The formation of the European gods of smithing like Vulcan, Hephaestus, and Gobannus emerged in this dynamic period at the dawn of the Bronze Age, representing the arcane skills and knowledge required to master the mysteries of metal. With Vulcan and Hephaestus, it is fairly clear that they began their divine careers as gods of fire, in a time beyond the Bronze Age, and the intense importance and connection between fire and smithing. Vulcan's name is probably related to a relatively obscure Indo-European word relating to flame, fire, or brightness, though nobody is quite exactly agreed as to which word, and some believe it's not Indo-European at all. Hephaestus likely originated from a pre-Greek deity of fire and smithing, with the techniques and god taken and adapted by the Proto-Greeks from a culture that had already adapted smithing at an earlier point. But this is not the case with Gobannus, Gaelic Govnu. The name Govnu is entirely Indo-European and means simply smith. from Proto-Celtic Gobannus, of the same meaning, ultimately from Proto-Indo-European gob, related to Latin faber, meaning artist, craftsman, or smith, Armenian darbin, English deft, and Proto-Slavic dober, meaning good, and most significantly perhaps Lithuanian gabia, meaning the sacred home fire. Another word used in Gaelic is caird, which can mean artisan, smith, and perhaps especially a goldsmith. And this comes from Proto-Indo-European caird, meaning to profit or craft, and is cognate with ancient Greek kairdos, meaning to gain or profit. The earliest sources that we have on Govnu are Roman period dedications from Gaul, but the god himself must have belonged to the Proto-Celtic period, for his Gaulish name, Gobannus, is of the same root as the Gaelic Govnu and Welsh Govannon. One of the interesting artifacts found dedicated to him is a large bronze cauldron, and there may be evidence to think that Gobannus was linked to this in Gaelic myth as well. Just as the Greek Hephaestus serves up the ambrosia to the gods, the Gaelic gods had the feast of Govnu. There are a number of significant relief carvings of the god in Gaul, sometimes under the guise of Roman Vulcan, but often occupying a place of importance above what we would expect from the Roman god. He is featured on the famous Pillar of the Boatman, on the same level of the pillar as Jupiter and the three-horned bull and the god Essus. An inscription in Gaulish, written using the Greek script, calls him Gobannus, the world traveler. This brings up a different element to his nature that is not at first seemingly connected to his role as smith, but there are strong links between this epithet and the Govnu of Gaelic myth. In Wales, the town of Abergavenny bears the traces of his name. In Roman times, the settlement was called Gobanium, the ruins of which lie under the modern town. It was a marketplace named after the god, and likely home to many smiths, as the name implies. In Welsh myth, Govannon was the son of Dawn, and brother to Gwydion, name meaning of the trees, Amaethon, the plowman, and Aranhrod. This isn't so dissimilar a genealogy to his Gaelic counterpart. Govnu is often said to be the son of Ethu, meaning kernel or seed, from which emerges many of the most important gods. He is called a brother to Dian Cecht, meaning of fierce power, but Cecht can also mean a plow beam. Dian Cecht is the father of Miach, from whom grows all the healing herbs in the world. His poetess daughter's name is Ermad, meaning a measure of grain. And he is also most often called the father of Cian, who in folklore becomes a gardener for Balor, who together with Lugh makes even his desolate island flourish under fruit trees. Cian, Lugh, and Govnu are inseparably linked in folktales, and in the Welsh myth of Culhwch and Olwen, one of the tasks of Culhwch is to have Govannon sharpen the plough of his brother Amaethon, and to have Amaethon plough a field which only he was capable of. This will be explored in full in another video, but consider the following. Thay, cognate with Lugh, is linked all around with gods associated with plants. Gwydion, of the trees, Amaethon, the plowman, and his wife, Blodeuwedd, flower face. And he is effectively reborn from an oak tree. In Gaelic, Lugh is the son of Ethnu, meaning kernel, and son of Cian, the herdsman and gardener, where his presence was said to cause trees and flowers to flourish, and cows and women to come into milk. But the moment he is gone, they vanish. Lugh protects the trees and the crops from drought, and the name of one of his sons is Cnú Deriol, Little Nut. He is a god whose identity is closely linked to trees, probably sometimes pictured as the embodiment of a tree. Likely the tree he goes to in his doom, and from which he is called down from again, the oak tree. The oak tree is linked in all Indo-European myths to lightning and rain. which in turn is linked to the fertility of the land and the growth of plants. This has a direct relevance to our understanding of Govnu, or Gobannus, and his fiery forge. The genealogy of Govnu, found in the Laurgavala Erin and elsewhere, generally calls him the brother of Luchtanasir, or the carpenter, Credna Caird, the gold worker, as well as Dian Keth, the leech or healer, equated in Cormac's glossary called Deus Salutis, meaning God of health, safety, and welfare. Credna Caird and Luchtanasir are, however, really just part of the triplified aspect of the great god of fabrication, Govnu. The Celts were very fond of triplifying the aspect of gods, and we see this same thing with many others. Even the goddess of the land of Ireland, Eru, is given a triplified nature. The Dagda is called the one with three forms, and his daughter, Brigid, also has three forms. So this concept isn't at all unusual. Govnu and Dian Keth were sons of Esark, perhaps related to a word meaning to beat or to strike. This makes sense for Govnu at least, as the word can refer to striking a hammer upon iron. The most significant preservation of the role of Govnu is found in folklore recorded in the 19th century. But one of the earliest is in the form of a Christian saint. Govan, or Govan Finn, meaning the bright smith, was son of Lugdech, a name often used to refer to the god Lugh, or his mortal devotees. Findlug or Lugdech were very common names for the fathers of saints in the early period, and a part of this may be mythologizing, and another element may be that these were the sons of priests of Lugh. As Lugh is called the master of all arts, then the gods which carry out those individual arts would have been closely connected to him. All the gods are shown to occupy a particular functional role in Tara, for which every god is allocated to a particular position. Lugh then stands above them all as a totality, which is how he gains admittance, proving himself against the intelligence of Nuada, the magic of the Dagda, and the strength of Ogma. In Gaul, there are depictions of Mercury with a smith's hammer, while in Gaelic folklore Lugh was said to be apprenticing under Govnu. There are a number of saints named Govan, or Gowan, perhaps all originating separately from the worship of the god. Some would argue that since they were placed within the historical period, they must have been real figures. Now they may well have been, but they do carry on the aspects of the god in their legends nonetheless. In the life of Saint Aidas, a name based on the Gaelic name Aed, meaning fire, this saint was said to have required the building of an oratory. He breathed on the hands of an unskilled man named Gowan, and transformed him into the most skilled craftsman who built him an everlasting oratory. In another tale, a man named Gowan is said to have been blinded by the curses of saints because he overcharged them in building their churches, but that his sight was healed after he agreed to build another. In the tale of Saint Moling, the saint obtained a piece of the sacred yew of Ross from Saint Molasius, and Moling contracted Gowan to build him an oratory. However, when the saint went with Gowan to cut a tree for the wood, the first strike of Gowan's axe upon the tree sent a splinter of wood into Moling's eye. He hid this from Gowan, but a student later saw the saint and chanted a further curse upon him.
A mill shaft under thine eye, a holly branch under thine eye, every trouble in thy cheek, a taloned griffin under thine eye.
After which the figure disappeared, and the tale remarks that he was likely a demon. The saint is worse off than ever and continues wandering. When he comes across another figure, the story goes that as Moling was on his way, there he saw a sedate, gray-haired cleric beside him. "What is the matter with thine eye, O cleric?" he said. "A chip stuck over it," says Moling. "Come hither, that I may chant a prayer to it." Moling comes to him, and then he said, "Mary's spittle, God's spittle, hole to which it is put, hole to which it goes. From Mary its healing has been given, hole to be every eye round which it goes. A well that bathes eyes, which will be with health. That he succored thine eyes, succored the eyes of Torbit. Luke, of the king of the heavenly city's household, that which succored thine eyes succored a serpent's eyes. May I see the serpent, and its eyes after it. Through thy word, O Jesus, Luke the physician has healed. I succor thine eyes, I have no fault of leeches, as God succored Mary, God the king without fault in his spittle." Moling's eye was healed at once, and his sight had never been better before, and after this the cleric did not appear to him. "In sooth," says Moling, "yon messenger was sent to me from my Lord to succor me." This episode is especially interesting because it corresponds to a very early Christian charm, fused with pagan elements. On the one hand, its reference to the protective power of the serpent is similar to that found in what is sometimes called the Klostenberg incantation, found in a medieval tome in Klostenberg, Germany, left behind perhaps by one of the early Gaelic missionary monks. It reads, "My belt is of the serpent, a serpent that wraps around. May men not wound me, women not destroy me." But it is the so-called Saint Gaul incantation that directly aligns with this tale of Govnu and the saint. It is a healing charm, and it reads, "Nothing is higher than heaven, nothing is deeper than the sea. By the holy words that Christ spake, from his cross remove from me the thorn. A thorn, very sharp, is Govnu's science. Let Govnu's goad go out before Govnu's goad." Someone has a thorn, or perhaps a sliver or wood chip, and Govnu is called upon to aid in its removal, driving it out with his goad. Perhaps one important thing to mention in this is that a goad, of course, is that which drives cattle, and this will come up again in connection to Govnu. However, this only really makes sense when we acknowledge that Govnu is the same god as his brother Luchtana, the woodworker, all three belonging to one concept of deity linked to the process of manufacture, of creating forms, and indeed this likely extended to the myths about the creation of the world, which we have now only hints of, as well as the fact that it is Govnu's feast which the gods must partake in to remain youthful and immortal. A different incantation for a different ailment in the manuscripts call upon Govnu's brother, Dian Kecht. It says, "I strike its disease, I vanquish blood, let it not be a chronic tumor. Whole be that whereupon it, Dian Kecht's salve, goes. I put my trust in the salve which Dian Kecht left with his family, that whole may be that whereupon it goes." These incantations were performed by people professing to be Christians, monks, and possibly even canonized saints. But there is no ambiguity. They are invoking the pagan gods. In later times, the explicit names of the gods were replaced instead by the names of saints, but the practices remained. Saint Gowan, regardless of his real existence, takes on the nature of the god in the minds of the early medieval Gael, if for no other reason than his name, and acts as a Christianized substitute. Dian Kecht and Credna also worked together to forge and replace the arm of Nuada with one of silver, giving him the nickname Argidlau. So Govnu also played a role in healing, at least in certain respects, and may concern his nature as the creator and repairer of forms, just as he helps his brother restore the arm of the king. But St. Patrick likely wasn't calling on Govnu for assistance. In his famous Lorica, which may or may not have actually been written by him. He says, "I invoke therefore all these forces to intervene between me and every fierce, merciless force that may come upon my body and my soul, against the incantations of false prophets, against black laws of paganism, against false laws of heresy, against deceit of idolatry, against spells of women and smiths and druids, against all knowledge that has forbidden the human soul." The knowledge of the smith was viewed by Patrick as its own type of magic, right alongside witches and druids. The Riddle of Steel was magic in the ancient mind. The knowledge and process of the smith as guarded and secret as those of the witch's brew. He worked with the forces of fire and earth which were beyond understanding, known to work only through generations of secret techniques passed on through the ages, extending in an unbroken chain back into the mists of ancestral time. The process was so mystical that iron was believed to hold power against the Sidhe, the various spirits that inhabit the world, closely connected with the dead. The smith was and is not a brute who mindlessly smacks at a piece of iron with a hammer, but a secretive artist viewed even as a sorcerer. One need only look at some of the art which these men created, items thought to be imbued with souls, capable of speech. Let's take a look at the sword with a hilt that is shaped like a man. It is marvelous, fascinating, almost beyond our comprehension. But it is very likely that this hilt represented the spirit of the sword, with the hilt forming its humanized guise, just like an idol to a god. Both Celtic and Germanic peoples swore upon such blades, believing that their swords heard their words, and if broken, would turn against them in battle, causing their deaths. These were spiritual forces that the smith contacted, even channeled while working his forge, and it helps to give us a slightly different view of the ancient smith than our common perception now. He was a worker of magic as much as of ore, and indeed could not have worked the ore without the magic. The famous Gaelic hero Kuhlen is very much connected to the smith. His name means Hound of Kulin. Now, Kuhlen was a legendary smith of Ulster, and it's likely his name means crippled, cognate with ancient Greek kulos, with kulopodion used as a name for Hephaestus. The idea of the crippled smith, some believe, came from disabilities incurred from working with bronze, as there is often arsenic found alongside copper ore, which would have been released when it was smelted and inhaled by the smith, poisoning them over time. It would have been a terrible process. However, as likely as it is that many ancient smiths did not enjoy a healthy long life, there isn't a specific side effect to arsenic poisoning that would lead to myths of crippled smiths all across Europe. More likely is that people born with such disabilities could only excel at a very few trades which required limited leg mobility. So those who suffered from crippling ailments as children were probably apprenticed to smiths rather than walking the fields. Cuchulainn achieved the name by slaying the Hound of Kulin, who was guarding his property and herds. In recompense, Cuchulainn, then named Setanta, vowed to act as Cuhlen's hound, guarding his property, borders, and herds, and indeed all the boundaries and herds of Ulster, like a fusion between Mars and Mercury. Alternatively, he is referred to as Cu Nacerd, Hound of the Craftsman, meaning the protector or warrior of the craftsman. Now, of the ancient professions, it would have been the smith who is most likely to be in possession of high-valued items like gold, fine swords, bronze, which were at risk of being robbed. The god is called upon to protect the property of the craftsman from those who would steal it. Julius Caesar, when commenting on the Gaulish gods, remarked that the sanctuaries to Mars had many piles of gold dedicated, which no one dared to steal from, and based on inscriptions and commentaries, a god interpreted as Mars in one place was thought to be Mercury in another. Kuhlen's original name, Setanta, means one who stays on the path, linking him to the idea of Mercury as the god of pathways. But his nature is clearly and primarily martial, akin to a Gaelic Heracles. He is the guardian of the smith, but also the warrior of the smith. The smith, of course, produces the weapons of the tribe, the same weapons the warrior will put to use. This comes up again in folktales, where Govnu and Lug are closely connected, and perhaps for shocking reasons. In the second battle of Mugturt, Govnu and his two brothers were said to have forged the weapons for the battle. Lug, Dagda, and Ogma were said to have received special equipment for the battle. Lug is called the powerful striker, and despite being the one who possesses many skills, he, like his multi-talented son Kuhlen, is represented as primarily a martial figure, named in the colloquy of the ancients and elsewhere as the most powerful warrior that ever existed. In the battle, all the gods take on a specific role. Ogma represented the class of the warrior, the Dagda the druids, and Lug the youthful god-king. Govnu, along with his brothers, are of course the craftsmen, who make and repair the weapons and armor every day, keeping the troops well supplied. Their work is said to have given the Tuatha a decided edge against the Fomorians, whose weapons and armor were inferior due to their more primitive nature. Originally, many of them were thought of as giants and monsters, but were humanized for the Christian tale. Ruadan, son of Bress, the ousted traitor king, tries to infiltrate the camp of the Tuatha and makes a cast at Govnu with one of his newly forged spears. The smith is wounded, but he takes the spear and casts it back, killing Ruadan. In Welsh myth, one of the few things that we know about Gobannus is that his spear killed Dylan, the twin brother of Say. This likely shares a common origin in the Iron Age, if not earlier, but it can no longer be pieced together fully in its current state. Most important for the purpose of this analysis is that Govnu is linked to the creation and the wielding of deadly spears that can kill a god. Such a spear is most likely lightning. There is more than one tradition in the Greek myth, but in at least one, Hephaestus is the one who forges the lightning bolts of Zeus. In others, Zeus obtains them from the Cyclopes, the primordial storm gods. In later traditions, the Cyclopes are presented as working for Hephaestus in his forge. This is because lightning was viewed as a form of fire, and Hephaestus was the master of fire. Everything created of fire was linked to him. He made the chariot of the sun. He made the arrows of Apollo, likely the fiery rays of light. And in the Homeric hymn to Hermes, fire is specifically called the mighty power of Hephaestus. In Slavic myth, Dazbog, a solar-related deity, is called the son of Svarog, who seems to be a smith god, a celestial architect, whose other son is the god of fire. In Celtic myth, the situation is somewhat more complicated, perhaps due to the state of our sources. The most likely candidate for a god of fire would seem to be the Dagda, or one of his sons. The Dagda is fairly frequently called Eith, or Eith Avreth, meaning fire or fire eyelash. In some medieval folk explanations of this name, they say that the Dagda comes from the words Daig Dia, meaning fire god. His children, Angus MacOg, who was conceived by the Dagda with bowing, after which he made a day last 9 months, and held the sun in the sky that whole time, or at least made it appear so magically, so that he was conceived at dawn and born at midday. In Britain and Gaul, he was linked to Apollo. Brigid, the daughter of the Dagda, is connected with the dawn, fire, and the sun. She is known as Brigantia in Britain, and she was equated with Minerva, Fortuna, and Victoria. Her Christianized cult uses solar iconography and originally maintained a perpetual fire. But she is also said to have had 3 forms, one as a filly, one as a healer, and yes, one form as a smith. The Dagda is also once said to have possessed an anvil, and elsewhere a griddle for working upon the fire. The name Eith, used by the Dagda, or said to be his son, is a direct cognate with the Persian god of fire, Adar. Our evidence points to the Dagda in some way being similar to Slavic Svarog, perhaps connected with the original identification of the Sky Father, Deos, the bright sky, connected with the sun, light, and therefore also fire. The Indo-European Deos becomes a solar god in the Hittite religion, for example. It is possible that Govnu and the Dagda are not so far removed from each other. In the tale of Mugturt, the legendary druid, there is a god identified as the king of the mounds, who is likewise the father of a goddess who tries to lure Mugturt. He is called by the Roman name Vulcan. In the Ulster cycle, Angus mac Og appears to Kuhlen in his sickbed and informs him that he is the son of Eith Avrith. In Cormac's glossary, Eith is described as being the god, or rather the goddess, of fire, equivalent to Roman Vestra. The Dagda is not quite Vestra, but he is closely linked to fire. We will not be able to explore this idea fully here, but it is possible that there was some earlier time when Govnu and the Dagda were not fully distinct. But Govnu takes on the element of the manufacturer, whereas the Dagda is more closely connected to the element itself. The most well-preserved and coherent tale of Govnu is not to be found in our medieval sources, but in folklore. Those who compiled the medieval accounts were Christians trying to rewrite all Gaelic history and myths to conform to biblical narratives. They altered the original tales into what is likely a barely recognizable form. But as most lay people never read these medieval versions, nor perhaps had they even heard of them, it is possible that the oral traditions may be in respects more reliable. One of the most coherent and repeated tales that folklorist Jeremiah Curtin found across Ireland was the tale of Govnu and his stolen cow, referred to as Govnu's Grey, or Glas Govnu. In some of these tales, Govnu's name is preserved as Elin Gav, a name meaning the mischievous smith. A version that Curtin tells in short that he heard near Carrick in County Donegal more or less repeats important elements of many other versions. A cow came down from the sky and gave milk in unlimited abundance to all people. The powerful try to obtain her, but she always gets away. She appears first at Dunkeenly, a name linked to Cian, and then goes near the ocean, and when a powerful man tries to detain her there, she floats up into the sky and flies away, and now there is no more abundance and unlimited milk. The first man in Ireland who possessed this magical cow is Govnu. Entire lengthy tales are told of how he traveled across the sea, making what is a voyage into the other world in order to obtain the cow through great hardship. One dynamic often found is that the cow was originally in possession of the king beneath the waves, who gives the cow to the king of Spain. And this king of Spain appears to be the same as Balor, who shows up in other versions. He then offers to give up his daughter, along with the cow, to any champion who can manage the cow for 7 years. Govnu, through his hard work and the advice of an old man, is able to obtain the cow, who may be the same as the daughter of the king of Spain, that is, Balor's daughter, Ethnu, though the tale never says so specifically. When he gets the cow, he soon realizes that it is as much work to keep her as it was to win her. He spends all his days watching the cow, and she moves speedily from pasture to pasture. If one manages her too sternly, she will fly into the sea. Still, because he spends all his time managing the cow, he can no longer forge any weapons. This is normally where Cian, or Keenly, the father of Lugh, enters the tale. He is seeking a sword, and he wants Govnu to make it, for he is the only smith in the world that can. At first, Govnu refuses because he greatly fears losing the cow, but eventually he relents on the condition that Cian manages the cow for him. Well, it turns out that Cian is not as good a cowboy as Govnu, and the cow jumps up and flies away into the sea, sometimes due to some trick of Balor, who appears in the guise of a young red-headed boy. Balor then keeps the cow on his island, or the cow returns to the King of Spain. Cian goes to win back the cow, and in the process, a son is born to the daughter of the King of Spain, or to the daughter of Balor, who is Lugh, or another folk name replacement like Cormac. Cian returns to Ireland, but is killed by 3 brothers, or the servants of Balor, which we could recognize as being the same dynamic as Cian being killed by the sons of Turin. Cian's son grows up and comes to look for him, sometimes rescuing him from having been turned to stone. He takes up work with Govnu, and looking for revenge, he uses a spear or a piece of red-hot metal right off the forge of Govnu, and is able to kill Balor with it. Not all these dynamics appear in exactly the same way in every version of the tale, but these are the general elements found in many versions. So what then is this cow of Govnu? Jeremiah Curtin, who had studied many different folk tales from across the world, was of the opinion that this cow was the cloud cow. The basic structure of the myth is very similar to that found in the Rig Veda. The cows, being the rain-bearing clouds, are stolen away by Vrtra. There are 2 separate tales in the Rig Veda about this. One involves cows that are hidden in a cave, the waters perhaps retained within the earth. Others have read this as being light. The other relates to the rains trapped in high-altitude clouds, or clouds that are somehow withheld, the water trapped, stolen away somewhere. In the medieval tale, the cows that are stolen by the Fomorians are said to belong to the Dagda, and specifically one which he wins in an earlier payment, which is responsible for leading all the other cows home once Lugh wins the battle, perhaps showing more overlap between Govnu and the Dagda. Govnu, like Hephaestus in the Greek myth, is connected to the forging of the thunderbolt, and the Cyclopes are perhaps connected with Balor and his deadly eye. The exact nature of Balor can in no way be covered here in any great detail, but he is the oppositional force within the clouds or within the earth, which is restraining the cow and can cause destruction, and he thus serves the function of the traditional dragon. It probably isn't a coincidence that there is a type of dragon in Romanian myth called a Balur. He can give out the cow, but more often he retains her, and she must be won from him by a champion. In some versions, Balor is dismayed that nothing will grow on his island. Cian then, with the young Lugh at his side, agree to work for him, and they cause the plants to thrive. However, as soon as they leave, everything goes away. There is an overlap between the tale of Turin and the folk tales of Balor, and it's not out of the question that the 2 are in fact one. But if so, it does not follow that he was the Greek Zeus or even Thor, just as his father Ogma is called sun-faced. But all this leads back to a connection to drought, which he seems to represent in the tale. The second battle of Mugturt is one of the most iconic stories in Gaelic myth. In the untranslated section of the work, Lugh threatens to unleash floods, repeatedly upon the Fomorians to wash them into the seas, and he directly calls upon thunder and lightning. He refers to his specific warriors as a black or dark army. The hero overthrows the thundering god and defeats him as the lightning wielder who destroys the rain withholder. The same dynamic is found in Scottish folklore with the hero Conall Cairlu, who defeats the Thunder Hag at the harvest time. She arrives and sets the fields and forests on fire through the dryness of late summer. Angus the king is unable to do anything about her, because of course he is related to the sun and fire, but the hero arrives to put an end to her terror, and he casts a spear at her from the summit of a tall hill, driving her off and causing rain to fall from her chariot wheels as she races away, breaking the clouds. Gobannus plays one of the most critical roles in this myth, for he is the first to obtain the cow, and perhaps in the form of the primordial architect, or perhaps in a role akin to the Cyclopes of Greek myth. He is the first to have won the cow, because he was the creator of the thunderbolt, not only a smith, but a primordial thunder god by necessity. There is perhaps a reflection of such an idea in Gaul, for occasionally Gobannus was equated not with Vulcan, but Mars. He is capable of wielding the thunderbolt and fighting, guiding the cloud cows, but he was not able to both create and maintain at the same time. The moment he returns to the act of creation, he fails to sustain the cow, nor can Kuhlen manage to do it, save through his role as the progenitor of the lightning wielder. Much of this is of course open to interpretation, but what is clear is that in folktales and even in Christian lore, Gobannus was a very important figure. He was the master universal architect, using fire to forge the lightning bolt, but he likely was involved in the very process of the creation of the world, which the tale of Balor may recall in some basic fashion, the original ordering of things and the rise to power of the Sky King through the utilization of the forge. In Cormac's glossary, he is called the fabricator, the one who takes the raw matter and beats it into shape, who molded the forms of the world, and who brought nourishment to the land as he does to the gods themselves. It's interesting to wonder if the connection to the Feast of Gobannus relates to the act of burning sacrifices, with the fire consuming the item and gifting it to the gods, or if this is just his mastery over the fire or aether or the forms themselves of the material world that allows him to rejuvenate the gods whose bodies are thought as a form of fire. He was a smith, a woodworker, and a fine worker of bronze, silver, and gold. He was a warrior able to wield the lightning with his own hands when he needed, but for the sake of his sacred role in the cosmos, he frequently gives over his powerful weapons to the great kings. Now, I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon or PayPal. Big thanks to all of my supporters out there, and as always, stand tall.